Several people have been asking for information on how to approach doing multicolor, multi-layer epoxy. And so in this video, we're going to focus on one project and how we go about the process step by step. I'll be recording this video one day at a time, one step at a time, and then we'll have a series of videos that discuss how we approach a project like this. The first step is to gather some artwork that will allow you to design the vectors necessary to cut this project. The client sent me an Adobe Illustrator file, and it looked like this. These files can be easily imported into Vectric vCarve Pro. I'll show how we do that here in a second. The problem is when they come into the project, they don't always look like you see here on this screen. They look quite different. Then there has to be a lot of modification and work done to make them so that you can actually turn them into a multicolor project that looks like the picture the client sent you. So next, let's demonstrate how I bring that Adobe Illustrator, that AI file, into the Vectric project. I simply tap on the Import Vectors folder. I go select the file that I want to bring in. Now the file's opening, and you can see it opens off the screen, so it's not in the right location. The first thing I do is go to center that file in the center of my project by hitting the alignment button. Click on alignment, align to material, and now it's in the center. But you further see that it doesn't look exactly the way we want to see it. So we're going to have to do some modifications right off the bat. The first thing I want to do is to go ahead and make it a little larger. I'm going to center that now. The next step is to resize it to the size I want it based on the material. So I use the resizing tool, making sure the link XY button was pushed. You can now see we have these extra vectors in here that we need to do something with, get rid of, or hide. So I'm going to take this border here and I'm going to make a new layer and go ahead and move that to a new layer so that I can hide it and it's there for in the future. You can see that I've already done a lot of the work. So the next vector that I need to get rid of is this border here. And I'm just going to go ahead and delete that one because there's going to be no use for that in the future. Now that that extra border is deleted, you can see that this vector doesn't look anything like three colors. It's just one color. So there's going to need to be a lot of work done to make it look like the vector that we imported, which let's take a look at that again real quick. As you can see, this vector is one single vector and it doesn't have areas for three different colors. I've already done that work. Let me show you what the vector finally looks like when I get done. Alright, you can see this vector has actually several different offsets, I'll call them. I'm going to go through how to do that in the future, not in this video. This video I'm going to focus on just pouring one of those vectors. If you look on the right side, you'll see a number of colors, black, white, green mentioned. That's because I've taken each of those vectors and separated them on different layers, and that's what I'm showing you here is they're on different layers, and therefore when I start to pour, I will pour each of those layers by the color code that I've given it. Today I'm not going to go through how to actually separate those layers. I will do that in a future video very soon. This video I'm just focusing on the concept of how this is set up. So I brought in a single layer. I manipulated that into multiple layers, at least three. You saw there were more. And then I set up the toolpaths for each layer. So what I'm showing you here is how I can preview those toolpaths and see what the final three color the epoxy inlay should look like. You will note that this is subject to the resolution of the screen and what it can show us, but at least gives us a good representation of what we would expect the epoxy final version to look like. Okay, now that we've got the carving done, you can see that it's in the 3 colors, and the little black dots and things you see are just the resolution of the monitor where the bit is actually tipping in there, so you don't see the color. Remember, this is laying on top of black. It's an arbitrary setup on how I set the depths of this so the colors would show up. It's not the real carving depths. I have to set the real carving depths later. I just wanted to see how everything would look. Now, as we look back and check out the vectors, you'll see that all of those vectors are laid inside of that black border. So my first pour is actually going to be to pour black in that whole square. And compare that now to what our original logo looked like when it got brought in before we fixed all the layers and made all the different vectors. The next step is to actually set up the toolpaths for cutting the black. So I'm going to set up the toolpath for the black right before I just set it up deep enough to allow the colors to show through it. Now I've got to set it for the proper depth. I'll set it for 0.15. And then I'll select a 30-degree V-bit. Once I got my 30-degree V-bit picked, I validate I have a clearance tool that will clear out that pocket. You can see it's pretty large. So I'm using a 1/4 inch end mill. And I validate I've got the toolpaths I want. I'll go ahead and use that offset toolpath and then move on. As I review the profile of the cut, I just realized I need to orient this differently. I like my X short and my Y long, so I'm going to go readjust this, and I'm not going to do all this on screen. You know how to do that. I'm going to turn it 90 degrees, and that's what you'll see in future cut sequences. Off screen, I saved the toolpaths and set them up for cutting the first layer, which is the black layer, and what you see me doing here is zeroing my 30-degree V-bit and making sure everything's set for the first cut. I like to cut with my V-bit first. Remember, I set this toolpath up to cut with a V-bit, set for 0.15 deep, and then I'll clear out the pocket with a 1/4 inch end mill. So that's what you'll be observing is me going through that cut process, and now I'll go to fast forward. You don't have to watch all of this cut in slow speed. The V-bit toolpath is finished now, and now I'm changing out to a 1/4 inch end mill, and no need for you to watch all of that. It's just a bit change. We'll get it changed, and then what you'll see is I'll carve out the using the 1/4 inch end mill, and we'll have the pocket completely cleaned at that time. Then I'll brush it all out and air blow it out so it's nice and clean to get ready for the next part, which is putting in the clear coat resin. Now that I have my first layer of black figured out, I'm going to calculate the amount of resin I need to be putting into that actual area. So I can do that by using the sizing tool. and checking the size, which says it's 5 by 10.65. I put together a little spreadsheet in Excel that I use, and I can go ahead and use that spreadsheet now to figure out how much resin I really want. So those are all previous projects that you're looking at, and now I'll add in this project, which I call Black Gridiron because it's Gridiron logo. I type in the values for my length and width. So my length is a little about 10.65, and I round up to 5.1. I'd rather round up than round down. I'd rather have a little more epoxy than less because it's hard to match the colors, although with black it's not too bad. So I put this little formula in there. I said it's going to be 0.15 deep, if you remember when I cut the toolpath. I've only got one area that I'm covering. I can do multiple areas with this little spreadsheet. Tells me it's 8.14725 cubic inch length times width times depth. And then I do a conversion factor to turn it into ounces. And now I'm just copying these from one cell to the next. You can see that it says I'm going to need 4.5 ounces of black resin. In reality, I'm not going to pour the black resin right away. I'm going to pour clear. I'm not even going to pour it. I'm going to wipe it on. So I'm doing a pre-coat. And so that's what I'll figure out next. So now I'm going to move to the next part. And my ratio is 1 to 0.83 with my Upstart epoxy. So I built this spreadsheet, and I'm not putting in the 5. I'm putting in 1.5 because that's the amount I want to mix up for my clear coat to pre-coat my material. And I'm thinking about it. I said, well, maybe 1.25 will work. When I do that, it then tells me I need 0.68 resin and 0.57 total hardener for a 1.25 mix. And this is just a check to make sure these two ratios actually work to the total I wanted. And at this point, then I can go mix my resin. So the next step is to make my mixture ratio. I use a scale for mine. The ratio is 1 to 0.83. So 1.25 ounces in this cup. So this here is a part that can get really messy at times if you're not careful. If you notice, I've got cellophane over my scale because I've messed up one scale already. Okay, at this point I'm going to go ahead and fast forward the video again. What you're going to see me doing is zeroing out the cup with the weight. They call it tearing it, making sure I have the right weight, and then I'm going to be pouring each part of epoxy. First the resin and then the hardener. So that's what you're going to see in fast speed. So the next step is to mix up the epoxy. And so the way we mix up this Upstart epoxy is we mix it, getting the sides, make sure it gets all cloudy, which it is. I don't know how well you can see that. It now clouded up. Now it's filling up with bubbles. We'll get the sides mixed in, keep mixing. Remember, this is only 1.25 ounces of epoxy, not a lot. And I check it by bringing it up and looking at it to see if it's actually clear and whether it's just bubbles. Of course, the camera, you can't tell. It's full of bubbles right now. A little more mixing. All right, so that looks pretty good, in my opinion. I'll set this off to the side, and now I'll start the pre-coat. So I basically usually just pour some in there at first, and then I start spreading it out and around. In fact, I go a little bit outside the border myself, because I know when I'm pouring the epoxy I'll have drips and I don't want them to bleed around. I try to avoid it, but I'm not that good. A shooting star in a film noir. So that's pretty much all there is to pre-coating. But just we'll hit one shot with the torch. Okay, so that's our pre-coat. We'll let it sit. Looks like everything's covered to me, looking at it. And we'll let that sit for 12 to 14 hours. So this is nice and hard, and come back and pour our black. So that's the end of this video. I decided partway through the project that I would make several small videos to help others. So therefore, much of the work for this project was completed in the Vectric software prior to me starting this video. And I already explained that earlier in the video. So this is the first of a series of, I'm not sure how many, 2, 3, 4 videos, where I'm going to cover the process of actually bringing in a vector into a project, and I'm going to turn that vector into a set of vectors that you can use for doing multicolor epoxy pours. This video just focused on the first part of that effort, which is getting to the point of putting your pre-coat on, and we'll end it here. The next video will discuss how I calculate the black resin, and then pouring the black resin, prepping for it, etc. until the black is poured, and how I actually go through the process of watching the resin cure and get to the point where we have a hard black first layer that we can carve into. That will be the next video in this series. I hope you found this video informative and it gave you some information that you may or may not have had before, but now you can use in a different way. I appreciate the opportunity to share this with you, because I've gotten a lot of information from other people and I appreciate the information they share. If you would do me a favor and like, comment, share, or subscribe if you like what you've got in this video, I'd appreciate it.